The little red light you ignore is the one you should fear the most. These 3 true hidden camera horror stories are based on real events, documented by a data analyst, a grieving couple, and a woman who thought she was living alone. A relaxing trip to a remote cabin turns into a desperate escape when a woman discovers she is the star of a hidden, live-streamed show. A family trying to heal from an impossible loss captures something on their Nanny cam that isn't just paranormal, it's personal. And a project manager, convinced she's not alone, sets a trap in her own apartment, only to catch a monster who already has a key. The most terrifying part isn't seeing the camera. It's realizing how long it was watching before you saw it. Subscribe now and turn on all notifications because you need to know what. Wendy's job was finding patterns in chaos. As a data analyst, she wrestled with massive streams of information all day, forcing them into something that made sense. But her real passion, the thing she did in her off hours, was different. She liked to look at the structure of the chaos itself. She was a nerd for network security, a gray hat. Not doing anything illegal, just poking and prodding at systems to see how they worked. It was a skill set that rarely came in handy until it was the only thing that could save her life. She'd rented the remote Colorado cabin to get away from the digital noise. For the first day, it worked. The silence was broken only by the wind in the pines and the occasional creak of the cabin's frame. She set up her workstation, noting the Wi-Fi was unusually good for a place so remote. She filed that data point away and enjoyed the peace. The second afternoon was perfect. She declared it a completely tech-free zone. No laptop, no phone. She made a cup of tea and settled into a deep armchair with a paperback she'd been meaning to read for months. An hour passed, then another. The only sounds were the soft rustle of a page turning and the low whisper of the wind outside. This was the quiet she had been chasing. A quiet so complete it felt like a physical presence. She put her book down for a moment and walked to the large window, looking out at the endless sea of pine trees and the sharp, distant peaks of the mountains. There was nothing out there but wilderness. She was completely, blessedly alone. As the sun began to dip lower, the light inside the cabin shifted, painting the walls in warmer tones. Her gaze drifted lazily across the room, appreciating the rustic wooden beams of the ceiling. And that's when she saw it, an anomaly. A tiny red light winking from the center of the smoke detector. On, then off. A steady, perfect rhythm. It wasn't a random glitch. It was a machine doing its job. She got a chair and looked closer. It was a pinhole camera lens. A cold feeling washed through her. Hours later, she found a second one in a USB charger by the bed. Then a third in an old clock. A fourth in an air freshener. This wasn't just security. It was a total systematic surveillance network. The physical evidence was clear, but her mind immediately went to the data. Where was it all going? This is where her fear turned into a cold, focused anger. These people had picked the wrong person to mess with. She wasn't going to just run. She was going to find the proof. She opened her laptop, bypassing her work files and opening up her toolkit. She launched a program called Wireshark. To most people, it would look like a meaningless waterfall of code. But to Wendy, it was a window into the network's soul. It was a tool that let her see all the traffic on the network, every bit of data coming in and going out. Nerd stuff, but powerful. She started a capture. It didn't take long. Amidst the normal traffic of her laptop checking for emails, there it was. A constant, heavy upstream packet flow, a steady signal of video data being sent from inside the cabin to a single, unknown IP address out on the wider internet. She couldn't see the video itself, but she didn't need to. The data was the confession. The packets were the proof. The cameras weren't just recording, they were broadcasting her live. For a moment, she just sat there, the quiet hum of her laptop the only sound. They were watching, right now. Anger boiled up, hot and sharp. Who were they? She isolated the destination IP address. Acting on pure instinct, she opened a command terminal. She ran a simple probe, a digital knock on their door to see who would answer. It was a long shot, a simple test to see if the port was open. The test completed. The screen showed a single line of text, and almost immediately she heard it. The sound of tires crushing gravel outside. A car was pulling up the driveway fast. Her probe, her digital knock on the door must have triggered some kind of alert. Her own investigation had been the alarm bell. A text message lit up her phone screen. It was from the host. "Just checking in," it read. "Hope everything is to your liking." At the same moment, the bright floodlight over the driveway flicked on, bathing the woods in a harsh white light. He knew she knew. She didn't waste another second. She slammed her laptop shut, grabbed her keys, and ran for the back door. She hit the tree line at a full sprint, the cold night air burning her lungs, the sharp snap of twigs under her feet echoing in the sudden, terrifying silence of the woods. She didn't look back. She called the police from miles down a paved highway. When the authorities arrived at the cabin, the host was there, ready with a story about a panicked, delusional guest. But Wendy had more than a story. She had the logs. The raw data from Wireshark was undeniable proof. It was a digital fingerprint that led the police not just to the host, but to a massive voyeurism ring. The ring Wendy exposed was not an isolated case. Authorities have uncovered similar operations across the country, some of which were live streaming hundreds of unsuspecting victims. What they did is a felony. In Colorado, a specific law makes it a serious crime to record someone in a private space, but the existence of a law is little comfort against a problem so widespread. The frightening truth is how common this violation has become. A full 47% of Americans who use vacation rentals report discovering hidden cameras. They are found not in elaborate spy gear, but in the most mundane objects. Smoke detectors, phone chargers, and alarm clocks. The very items Wendy discovered. Perhaps the most disturbing element is the institutional silence. Rental corporations receive tens of thousands of surveillance complaints, yet the stories are often buried, quashed by confidentiality agreements that prioritize brand image over guest safety. Wendy's experience pulls back the curtain on a horrifying modern reality. The true horror isn't just the knowledge that a stranger might be watching. It's the chilling realization that a whole system seems engineered to help them get away with it. You hear things. You know, stories people tell. More people than you'd think will tell you, straight-faced, that their house is haunted. It's the kind of thing you dismiss as a trick of the light, an old house settling. And the security cameras everyone has now, they just seem to add fuel to the fire. People see things in the grainy night vision, shapes in a dark hallway, or worse, faces where no face should be. It's the kind of thing you'd laugh about, until it's your house, your camera, and your family. That's the world Mark and Sarah Johnson found themselves in. They just didn't know it yet. Their house was not quiet. Grief is never quiet. It filled every room, a heavy, oppressive silence that felt louder than any noise. It had been months since they lost their young son, Tommy, but the loss was still raw. It was in the way they avoided looking at his closed bedroom door, or the way they'd both fall silent when they saw a toy he used to love. They still had their daughter, and they loved her fiercely, but the joy she brought was always standing in the shadow of the sun, who was gone. In a desperate attempt to feel normal again, they hired a live-in nanny. Her name was Lisa. She was a kind, warm woman in her late 40s, and her presence was like the first crack of light after a long storm. She brought a sense of gentle routine back into the chaos of their grief. She played with their daughter, she cooked simple meals, and she filled the house with a calm energy they hadn't felt in a very long time. For a week or two, it almost felt like they were healing, but the anxiety that had taken root in them was deep. The fear of losing control again was something they couldn't shake. That fear led them to the cameras. Mark bought a high-tech nanny cam system and installed it himself one weekend. He put one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the nursery. He told Lisa it was just a standard security precaution for the insurance. The truth was, it was for them. It was a way to watch over their fragile world from the darkness of their bedroom, a way to pretend they were still in command. On the first night the system was active, they lay in bed, the room completely silent, watching the live feed on a tablet. For a while it was boring, and that was a comfort. They watched Lisa tidy up the living room, then sit down to read a book. Eventually she went to her own room. The image switched to the nursery, where their daughter was sleeping soundly. On the screen, the living room was dark and still. In the corner of the frame, a small red toy train sat on the hardwood floor. It was one of Tommy's, its paint slightly chipped on the front. They watched the static image for a long time. Then, it happened. The train moved. It wasn't a slide or a settle. It rolled forward 3, maybe 4 feet, the tiny plastic wheels silent on the wood, and then came to a dead stop. No one was near it. The house was still. In the dead silent room, the impossible movement on the screen made both of their hearts jump. Sarah gasped, a tiny sound that was swallowed by the darkness. Mark stared, trying to process it, trying to find a logical reason. There wasn't one. "Just a glitch," he finally said, his voice flat and unconvincing. "A lag in the feed or something." He was trying to convince them both, but the words felt like a lie. It's a classic story, isn't it? An object moving on its own. Something you hear about but never, ever expect to see with your own 2 eyes. A few nights later, their unease turned into a deep coldness. They had become obsessed with the cameras, watching the feeds for hours each night. This time they were watching the nursery. They knew for a fact the door was closed. But on the screen, the knob began to turn, slowly. The door swung inward with a soft click. They saw Lisa, who was in the room rocking their daughter, look up at the open doorway. She didn't look scared. A small, gentle smile touched her face. "Hi, Tommy," she said, her voice perfectly clear through the tablet speaker. "You scared me for a second." The words hit Mark and Sarah like a physical blow. This was no longer a glitch. This was something else. They started watching Lisa more closely. They saw it constantly. She would be in the kitchen and seem to respond to a question no one had asked. She'd be in the living room and let out a soft laugh. Her eyes focused on an empty chair. The house no longer felt like it was healing. It felt like it was hiding a secret. They finally confronted her. They sat her at the kitchen table one morning, the bright sun making the conversation feel even more unreal. With trembling voices, they asked her who she was talking to. Lisa didn't look surprised. She simply put down her coffee cup and looked at them with a calm, steady gaze. She told them she could feel a presence in the house. A little boy. A lonely little boy with a toy train who missed his parents. Then she described him. She described the way he would tilt his head when he was curious. She described the small, white scar on his knee he got from falling off his tricycle in the driveway. These were details no one could possibly know. A real bone-deep chill went through them then. Everyone's seen those horrible videos that go viral. The ones that show a dark shadow moving over a baby's crib. The stories where parents wake up to find unexplained scratches on their kid's face. As they stared at Lisa, the terrifying question lodged in their throats. Was the presence in their house their lonely son? Or was it something else, something that could cause harm? The answer came on a night when their grief was particularly heavy. They didn't even speak about it, just got into bed and turned on the tablet. The feed showed the nursery. Lisa was sitting on the floor, talking to the empty space in front of her. Her voice was soft but clear. She was explaining that his parents were still so sad, that they missed him so much, and that he needed to find a way to let them know he was okay. As they watched, transfixed, the camera's view seemed to settle on the crib. On the wooden rail sat a small plastic train. With no one touching it, the toy began to rock back and forth. Its movement was slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. The camera's microphone picked up the distinct sound it made, a soft, repetitive tapping of plastic against wood. Tap, tap, tap. Lisa looked up, and her eyes seemed to stare directly through the camera lens, directly at them in their dark bedroom. Her face was full of a deep, knowing empathy. She leaned closer to the empty air in front of her, as if listening, then turned her head back toward the camera. In a whisper that carried perfectly through the speaker, a whisper that was both a promise and a final message, she said, "He says he's okay now." Mark and Sarah talked for hours that night, the tablet forgotten on the bed. They cried. They held each other, and they made a decision. They kept Lisa. The terror that had coiled inside them for weeks was replaced by something else, something they couldn't explain. It was a strange and fragile kind of comfort. Lisa had, impossibly, given them a bridge to the son they had lost. She had given them a closure they never thought they would find. She became a part of their family, and after that night, the strange things on the camera stopped. The toys stayed still. The house was finally quiet. But this time, it was a silence that was truly, finally, peaceful. Rachel's life was built on order, not in a fussy way, just a practical one. She worked a demanding job as a project manager, a job that was all about schedules, deadlines, and making sure every little piece was in the right place at the right time. She carried that same logic into her life. Her keys had a bowl, her mail had a tray, and her bills were paid the day they came in. Her apartment, a clean, modern one-bedroom in a new complex near Tampa, was her sanctuary. It was her quiet corner of the world where everything was exactly as it should be. The building itself felt like part of that order. It had key fob entry, bright, sterile hallways, and security cameras that watched over the common areas with a silent digital eye. It was a place that promised safety. After a long day of managing chaos at work, her routine was a comfort. She'd come home, the solid thud of her apartment door closing behind her, a sound that sealed off the outside world. She'd change clothes, make a simple dinner, and maybe watch some mindless TV. The sounds of the building were predictable, the low rumble of the air conditioning, the faint sound of a neighbor's television, the distant traffic. These were the sounds of a normal, peaceful life. She'd lived there for 2 years and had never felt anything but secure. The maintenance staff was polite. The neighbors kept to themselves. It was exactly the kind of anonymous, orderly peace she wanted. It's hard to say when, exactly, the peace started to curdle. It wasn't a single moment. It was a slow drip of wrongness that took weeks to form a puddle big enough to notice. The first thing was a smell. She came home one Tuesday, and there was a faint, sour odor in the kitchen, like old takeout, but she hadn't ordered takeout in a week. She searched the fridge, took out the trash, and ran the garbage disposal. The smell vanished as quickly as it came. She shrugged it off. Buildings are weird. Smells travel. A week later, she was getting a glass of water late at night and noticed one of the upper cupboard doors was open just a crack. She stared at it for a long time. She never left cupboards open, ever. It was one of her little things. But maybe she'd been distracted that morning, rushing for work. It was a simple mistake to make. She closed it, the soft click of the latch settling the matter, and pushed the incident from her mind. But a few days after that, she came home to find a magnet from her refrigerator lying on the kitchen floor. It was a cheap, weak magnet from a local pizza place. It could have just fallen. That's what she told herself. It just fell. But the explanations were starting to feel thin. Each little thing on its own was nothing. A smell, a door, a magnet. But together they felt like a pattern, a quiet disruption of the order she worked so hard to maintain. That's when the real unease began to set in. It was a low-level static in the back of her mind, a feeling of being watched when she knew she was alone. The worst was the bedroom blinds. She closed them tight every single morning before work. One Thursday she got home and they were tilted open just enough to see out. Someone would have had to twist the rod to do it. A draft couldn't do that. For the first time, she felt a genuine spike of fear. The feeling wasn't just that things were out of place. It was that someone was moving them. That was the last straw. She couldn't live with the constant second-guessing, the feeling that she was either losing her mind or being subtly terrorized. She ordered a security camera online, a small one disguised as a smoke detector. When it arrived, she installed it in the corner of her living room, a high perch with a clear view of the main living space and her front door. She didn't tell a soul. It was her secret, her silent witness. The first night it was up, she checked the feed constantly from her phone. The live view showed only her empty, silent apartment. She felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made her laugh. Maybe she was just overworked and paranoid after all. The next evening, she was in a late meeting at work when her phone buzzed on the table, emotion alert. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She excused herself, walked quickly to the hallway, and opened the app. Her breath caught in her throat. On the screen, she watched her own front door swing open. A man in a maintenance uniform stepped inside. It was Tom, the new guy. He used a key. He closed the door, and the soft click of the lock echoed in the silent apartment. He just stood there for a full minute, perfectly still. He wasn't there to fix anything. He began to walk slowly through her living room, his hands in his pockets. He stopped at her bookshelf, tilting his head to read the titles. He went into the kitchen and looked at the photos on her fridge. He was a tourist in her life. The sight of him, so calm and entitled in her private space, was horrifying. After a few minutes, he left as quietly as he came. The next day, she knew he'd been back. An earring was missing from her nightstand. The first camera's footage confirmed his entry. This time, he walked straight to her bedroom. The camera couldn't see inside the room, but it recorded him entering, and it recorded him leaving 10 minutes later. 10 minutes. An eternity. Her safe, orderly world had been a lie. Her home was not a fortress. It was a fishbowl, and he could tap on the glass whenever he wanted. She knew she needed more. She needed undeniable proof of what he was doing in her most private space. So she laid a trap. She went out and bought an expensive bracelet and left it on her bedside table. A glittering lure. She then set up a second, even smaller camera, hiding it in a fake plant on her dresser, aimed directly at the bait. The next morning, She left for work, the fear a cold, hard thing inside her chest. All day, she resisted the urge to check the feed. She waited until she got home that evening. Sitting in her car in the parking garage, she finally played the recording from the bedroom camera. Her stomach turned. The footage showed Tom walking into her room with a sickening confidence. Before he even glanced at the jewelry, he went to her dresser and slid open her underwear drawer. He reached in, pulled out a pair of her panties, and brought them to his face, sniffing them. He stood there for a long moment, a thief of the most personal kind. Then he tossed them back in the drawer, slid it shut, and finally noticed the bracelet. He walked over, grabbed it without a second thought, and slipped it into his pocket. He took one last look around her room, a slight smile on his face, then turned and walked out, completely unaware of the tiny, silent lens in the plant recording his every move. She had him. She took everything to the police. The footage was vile, undeniable, and irrefutable. Tom was arrested the next day, and when his face hit the local news, the floodgates opened. Other women in the complex came forward. They all had their own stories of small, unsettling things, of a persistent feeling of being watched. The investigation uncovered years of this behavior. He was a serial intruder who used his master key to feed a sick obsession. It's the kind of thing that makes you think. You hear the numbers, that something like 1 out of every 6 women will experience stalking in their life, and it just sounds like a statistic from a textbook. It doesn't feel real. But Rachel learned it's not just a number. It's the woman who lives down the hall. It's the person you work with. It's your sister. For her, the horrifying truth was that the monster wasn't some stranger trying to break down her door. It was the man who was paid to keep her safe, the one who already had a key.